Good evening, merry drinkers. Welcome back. This evening we're going to be looking into Germany, more particularly Bavaria, and at the history and the taste and the flavour of the wheat beer. I've chosen one from 300 beers to try before you die while I've still got some life in me. We're going to be looking at probably one of the flagship ones, which is the Franziskaner beer from Spaten. It's currently 3 bottles for £6 in Waitrose. I don't know how British craft brewers are going to compete with that, as beer I've had before, and it's an absolute belter. But Weißbeer itself is in and around, it's a classic German beer. I know they produce a lot of Pilsners and other styles of lager. But the Bavarians, they're famous not only as great consumers of beer, but also people who've kept faith in the world's oldest beer law, the Reinheitsgebot. So that was like a purge, really, back in the 1500s, that you could only use barley, yeast and water in your beer. Wheat beers obviously have wheat in them, so they're a slight twist on those Reinheitsgebot beers. And it wasn't really done for altruistic reasons either. The history of sort of the wheat beer is the Bavarian royals. They drank wheat beer, and they were determined that no one should particularly join them. The masses could do with brown beer made from wood cured malt, but the princes of the families would enjoy the delights and the flavours of wheat beers, and they had a monopoly essentially. They grew all the barley and grew all the wheat. And so they were able to stipulate what was available to drink, A, to the masses, and B, for themselves. So the Royal Court Brewery, or the Hofbrauhaus, was opened all the way back in Munich in 1589. So we're going way back there, sort of like rapidly approaching 500 years worth of brewing in that part of Germany. And the wheat beer was kept there for almost 300 years. It was only sort of like the mid 1800s that it started getting mass produced for the people in the local towns and cities in and around the Bavarian area. And they licensed a brewer called George Schneider to brew it. And that semi-links into Franziskaner. I mean, Franziskaner is brewed by Spaten. And then around that time, the guy who established Spaten Brewery, a guy called Seldermeer, he was beginning to sort of like really make the lager market was growing, and that was really starting to put a foothold in. And so the wheat beer came in to try and earn a few coin for the royal family. It's become very popular these days. It wasn't the case back in the 70s. I think one German newspaper sort of referred to it a bit dismissively as a beer only fit for old ladies with nervous dispositions. Obviously, when sort of the lager stronghold was really coming in, but since then it's made a bit of a comeback. I mean, especially now people are looking for far more flavour from their beer than just sort of a refreshing hit. Wheat beer has that in spades, and it comes from the wheat. It's very difficult to brew with, and so to qualify as a wheat beer, you have to have more than 50% of that bill has to be wheat. The rest of it is usually barley, and I think most wheat beers will be around 51-52%. It's difficult to brew with because it hasn't got a husk, so barley, its grain is contained within a husk, and so as it's brewing and that actual grain is breaking down, the husk acts as a filter. It takes a lot of the impurities out of the beer. It gets a nice, get that really nice visual gin clear pint, whereas we'll see in a minute this Franziskaner is very, very hazy. But hazy, as we all know, does mean flavour. Wheat doesn't have a husk, and so as it breaks down, it can get very, very mushy, and sludge can develop, which will block up a lot of brewing equipment. I suppose it's a bit like probably some of my arteries after having one or too many sort of burgers and kebabs. But it does lend spiciness, and it develops a lot of chemical compounds called phenols, which add a real nice bouquet and a lot of flavour going into the beer. So from 300 Beers Before You Die, Franziskaner's recommendation. So it's made by Gabriel Seldemeyer from the Spaten Franziskaner Weissbier in Munich, Bavaria. They specialise obviously in their lagers, but just to quickly jog through on that book, it's a little bit of history and the background to the beer itself. In Munich, the Spaten Brewery has seen its world turned upside down. This is famous as a site where Gabriel Seldemeyer, a member of the ruling family, developed commercial lager brewing in the 19th century, but it now devotes over half of its capacity just to brewing this wheat beer. It's sold under the Franziskaner label, and it's not on the Spaten website, just to probably keep it a bit of distance and keep a bit of separation from if you're expecting traditional Oktoberfest and lager styles beers. Franziskaner sits out on its own as its independent sort of brand. Now it shows a monk holding a mug of beer, and that's because the original beer brewery was bought by Seldemeyer. It's from 1363, one of the oldest buildings in Munich, and next door to that was a Franciscan monastery, and that gives the name and image to the beer. I don't think it's brewed there anymore. I think it's probably out in a specific site at the edge of the Charity. But yes, the only link to the monk, it's not a monastic brew or anything done by the church. It just happened to be next door to one, and I'd imagine that probably suited exactly what they were going for at the time. Now, Franziskaner, I mean, has to be over 50% to be qualified as a wheat beer. This actually has 75% wheat in the mix, and it's incredibly tricky to brew with. And I think they persevere with it just because of the flavours that it develops from having all of that grain included. It's got a complex hop recipe. I mean, this is mainly a malty beer, so it's very similar to English bitters, really. That it's the malt that's delivering on the flavour rather than the hops. But it does use 4, so it's got Orion, Perle, which I've not come across before, Spalt and Tecknang varieties. They ferment it in conical vessels, and the beer that emerges, they stick it into a centrifuge. I don't know how they did that back in the 1400s, but these days it's probably a massive, great big laboratory piece of equipment. Spin it round and get all of that ale yeast down to the bottom and removed. And then they add a lager yeast for a secondary fermentation in the bottle. So I'm expecting when it's open, this is going to be very lively. So you get lots of ale-based flavours, but then also sort of a lighter bodied, lagery finish, which is going to make it very drinkable. Yeah, just have a quick look at the Franziskaner here. It says on the bottle in not particularly big writing, product of Germany. Ingredients: water, wheat malt, barley malt, a hop extract, which is interesting, and then also yeast. So a little reference to my book of hops with my Don's beer reviews, sticker bookmarks. If you want to see a beer review done properly, go and watch Don. This says that hop extract is the future of hops. Innovative technologies have allowed hop processors efficiently and precisely extract alpha acids. Blah de blah de blah. These hop-derived products are extremely stable and come in many forms, from supercritical carbon dioxide extracted concentrates and liquids for precise bittering. So I'd imagine that probably gives them, if you're brewing massive batches of this, which I suppose you've got to get to 3 bottles for £6, you don't want to be sort of chickening loads of natural ingredients. So they've obviously substituted in hop extract, a couple of oils. You can get the millilitres exactly per ice and produce a really consistent product. Perle hops are included in here, so they're old world German, well-rounded German variety with good alphas and pleasant oils. It's gained popularity since its release in 1978, and it is now one of the most prevalent German hop varieties grown around the world today. It's renowned for high yields, high resistance to disease, and a high oil profile, typically German. It's widely used in commercial brewing in a variety of beers, starring in lagers as a welcoming and clean bittering agent and additional styles. It is what may be the most valuable asset of this workhorse is its DNA. It's highly related to the noble hop Hallertau Mittelfrüh, but has a much higher disease resistance. So it's obviously much more encouraging as a commercial brew. I think that's enough fapping around with the history of the beer. That's got me thirsty if nothing else. So let's have a quick look what Franziskaner looks like in a glass. I seem to remember they used to have the old monk on the lid, but they've replaced it for a bit more of a generic Franziskaner Weissbier cap. I don't have a nice big conical glass. I do have a very generic Stormtrooper beer number. Spaten are owned by AB InBev these days, so I'd imagine imagine this probably is the Stormtrooper's beer of choice. But let's have a look what it's like in a glass. Now, I do like a hard pour, and I've gone a bit hard at that. Now it's proper fizzing away, but you might be able to see the little hazy nature right down at the bottom. That really smells. There is loads of a banana style clove coming off the top. It really smells a bit like those old penny sweets, the old soft bananas that used to get. Now I don't know if it's an urban myth. I think I've read somewhere that that's what bananas actually used to taste like, but due to some sort of form of disease, they've been wiped out, and we've got just generic starchy bananas these days. It smells sweet as well. It really does. It's got like a soft drink type of fizz and real flavour to it. I'll give that a top back up before we go and have a taste. Now you might notice that it's called a Weißbeer, but that's not necessarily white. It's a very sort of like pale straw hazy colour. But the phrase Weißbeer actually comes from the great big massive head that you get off the top of it. You can also get dark Weißbiers, but you should always have that collar up on the top, and that's where Weißbeer comes from. Thirsty now, let's give this a go. Cheers everybody. There's lots of combinations to that. It's really fizzing around on your tongue, and that sweetness that you can smell hits your mouth straight away. It's got sort of a light to medium body, so you can feel that lagery consistency, the way it's dancing around. That's lovely and sweet. That banana flavour and clove just dominates the beer. If someone told me there was no hops in that, I'd probably quite believe them. There's a slight bitter edge at the back, which I suppose that's what that blend of 4 hop extracts is trying to achieve, is just to make sure it's not overly sweet. And there's a little bit more than banana. There's been like a raisiny, sultanery, whatever the difference is between those two bits of dried fruit, just in there in the background, just to add a little bit of complexity. If it was all banana, it would be too much. It'd be too sweet. And I don't know if it's the lager yeast in the bottle or what happens, but that is very drinkable, and you keep on sipping back to it. It doesn't have a dry finish. It does have a sweet finish. But it's a lovely sensation in the mouth, and it's really, really tasty. I can see why the royals kept that to themselves for a couple hundred years. You never know with beers. It's slightly odd that it just dipped off in the 70s and has all of a sudden made a bit of a comeback. But at £2 a bottle, I mean, you just cannot go wrong. It's an excellent version of the style. I might run a bit of a league table compared to ESB, which was also in 300 beers to try before you die. I think I gave that 3.6 on Untapped. I'd say this. I do like a strong beer, and I do like thickness and body. This is probably just a couple of digits dialed down from that. So maybe 3.4 for me on Untapped. Compared internationally, it has 432,000 check-ins at an average of 3.69, and for a cheap beer, God, that really delivers. But the Weißbeer, an excellent style. I'm glad they suffer in the mash to try and keep all their brewing equipment clean, so it's just to produce that extra bit of oomph and flavour. It's got a lager style consistency, but with ale flavours included in there. Imagine on a hot summer's day in a German market square, that tastes absolutely amazing. But until the next time, to all the Germans out there, cheers.